Welcome to Roleplay Geeks. I'm your host, Frank.
I am your token hippie, John.
I'm here. I'm Jim.
I am too.
And in case you're wondering, that is Steve, and this is Steve-O, the AKA the other Steve.
He likes Steven.
Oh, I'm sorry, Steven.
You can cut. I give
Well, he
people
should have
the
gone ahead and
option.
introduced himself,
That's why. That's why the
Steven.
N is in parentheses, so that you can call me Steve or Steve.
I got you. Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess.
And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to make some characters, what we're going to do. And now some of this effort we've done ahead of time. And some of us, Steve-O, have not done it ahead of time. And we're going to make it for the system. So let's go back to the very beginning. If you recall, we all went through and picked some systems that we would like to try to game within. And we, of course, gave Root a good shot for the money. And now we're moving on to, and I do have questions about how to pronounce this. Is it spelled OVA? Do we say it like it's spelled, or is it OVA?
I say OVA, but I know other people say OVA. So
Okay.
I think it just depends on what flavor nerd you are.
Right. So it's either OVA or OVA, which is I don't want
Personally,
to
I'm
say.
over that.
Okay. So
Ooh.
send all hate mail to John at
John.
roleplaygeeks.com. Anyway, so this is a game system. Now, Steven, I'm going to have you sort of kick in here as appropriate because I may mischaracterize it and I apologize. But I think of it as an anime-based system, and that's only because I think all the art in the book comes from an anime or a manga basis. But the idea behind this system is that you can do anything and you can be anything. And it's up to the player and the GM to sort of decide what they want it to be. So the system would allow you to be in a fantasy setting or a science fiction setting or a science fiction setting that's actually fantasy based or whatever you want to come up with. You can make any character that you can conceive of. You can make a 8-foot giant that only uses bowling balls for his attacks, who actually flies planes on the side. It really allows you, the player, to go a little nuts into your conceptualization. And this is an intriguing process for character generation because most character generations tend to have some form of, you pick your class, you pick your stats, you roll your stats, whatever it may be, you make some skills, and you have sort of a template, a mental template that you follow. And there's just no template for these characters. Now, Steve-O, I think you had something.
Well, I just want to add one thing before Steven does the deep dive into the rules. There is one requirement that all characters must have in this game, and that is the gigantic eyeballs. Okay, so I did discover that in the rules as I was reading them.
That is, the other competing in my head system for this kind of thing is called BESM. Big eyes, small mouth. So while not a requirement for this one for our campaign, people do have big eyes in anime. They do.
So one of the features of the system is, like I said, you can set up any sort of world or any sort of backdrop. And so for our foray into this, Steven is going to be our game master. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but certainly maybe since we were kids, this may be the first time I've ever gamed with you as the game master that I can recall. So there's a lot of interesting first that's going to go on with this system and this experience. And I'm kind of excited to find out how it turns out. But first, I think we should give our listeners a little bit of a backdrop. Now, the important word there, Steven, is little. A little bit of a backdrop as to the game sort of world that we're going to be running in. I know you've got some extensive thoughts about it, but let's see if we can just give them an overview of kind of the flavor. And so they'll understand why we've made the character choices we've made.
Okay. So it is post-apocalyptic, where the apocalypse was related to the Greenland ice sheet and a tone that the ice against the rocks ended up making as it started sliding off the mainland, which affected everything from people's perceptions and the thin skin between our world and the scary-ass world of what is just underneath the surface. And it also affected electronics equipment. And we're about 100 years past that, where there are people who are slightly tied in to heavily tied in to these perceptions and abilities to manipulate, while we're also dealing with a world that was thrown into chaos because of the disruptions to communications, electronics, travel, and just being able to speak to the person next to you. So there are a lot of people who are absolutely batshit crazy, and a lot of people who are just trying to scrape by, and that's where we are.
So kind of a post-apocalyptic Cthulhu-esque-ness, kinda.
I'll give you that. A little more maybe realistic, if you can say that based on my description.
So a post-apocalyptic Cthulhu-esque grounded in realism.
Absolutely.
I have one question. So the tone that came off of the Greenland ice sheet, what is it, just falling off into the ocean? Is that the deal? Was it the volume of the tone, or is this the first time that tone had ever been heard in the history of Earth?
E minor.
The only other times that particular tone had come into play were with the collapse of the North American ice sheet at the end of the last ice age, where they're now finding that huge release of water that affected the mountains and the plains and everything from Middle America out to the coast of Oregon and Seattle. So that would have been number one. The issue in particular with the Greenland was the sound that it made, because of the rock involved, emitted a different frequency that was not actually audible. It was sub-audible, so that you perceived it and felt it, but didn't hear it.
I'm going to perceive it and hear it as those tones that come at the beginning of the Intel commercials.
I hate you.
My Mac buddy.
Okay, so that should give you an idea of more or less what we've got going on here.
Okay.
Sorry, having a little bit of technical issues there for a second with my push to talk. And what I chose to do for my character, let's talk a little bit about character generation. And this is where Steven's going to have to get heavily involved, because I genuinely get confused by some of the rules. What effectively the way the rules work is you make a character and you go through, and there's different ways you can do this. And Steven suggested we use the 0 point system, which means that all your pluses have to be balanced by some negatives, essentially. So you go through and you pick these advantages, or I think that's what they use. And abilities, sorry. You pick these abilities, and they all have a point cost. And those point costs are either a 1 or 2 or 3. Now, I think it says in the rules they can go up to 5, but we were limited to 3. Broadly speaking, the more points you have in there, the better you are at doing those things. And there's a big long list of abilities that they have in there. And there's also kind of a get out of jail free card that says, and anything else you can think of talking to your GM. So you can do that as well. So you literally can come up with any ability that you want to think of that isn't contained within the book. Those are balanced out on the other side by weaknesses, and they are negatives 1, 2, and 3. So the sum of your abilities has to equal the sum of your weaknesses. That part's pretty straightforward, and it's kind of fun to sit down and figure out what your weaknesses and your abilities are and what kind of character you want to come up with. However, let me see what you guys think, because you guys have gone through this process. It created more of a challenge for me in making a character than normal. And the reason is because, and I understand why Steve really likes the idea of this game, I had to come up with a concept for my character, a backstory. I couldn't say, I'm going to play a ranger, or I'm going to play a pilot. I couldn't just do that and follow a template. I had to have some idea of what I wanted to do before I could even sit down and look at the rules. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I love it. It's easy for me. I just thought of what kind of character I wanted to play for our next game, and then it was just a matter of picking the abilities and weaknesses that built that idea of that character out. Really simple. And I love it. I think this is one of the easiest character creations I've ever done.
Well, for me, when I was going through, I'm not interested in anime, but I've seen some stuff, and so mainly I was looking at the rules and then seeing what kind of advantages and weaknesses you could kind of go into. And so when I did that, it's chock full of it. It's really just full of all sorts of stuff. And I can see where a lot of stuff is right out of at least some of the little bits of anime that I've seen. And so it's pretty involved. It's got a lot of oddities and stuff, which I think are generally kind of part of the differences between the Oriental and Occidental. And so it's really kind of neat, but it felt really overwhelming. So for me, it was like, well, I'm just going to kind of attach on to something, and that's exactly what I did. So when I did mine, I kind of came up with one little thing to do. I knew that I wanted to be fairly decent in terms of ability, and when I could fight fairly well, but I wanted to be just odd. And I'll come back to that if we do that later on and stuff and talk about our character. But I'm not going to say anything about it right now. So I didn't really my character's not fully formed like Athena from Zeus's head. It was more like bits and pieces, and I kind of glommed on, and that's one of my favorite words, glom. I glommed onto like an idea and then went with it like an arrow, and it's kind of odd.
So one thing I really liked about the rule system, I can't think of where, but I do like the idea of abilities versus flaws. I mean, that's a really neat system. It gives a lot of fertile ground to the game master to have these things come into play, and it allows for a great deal of role playing. Now, one thing that struck me, one thing that reminded me, what?
Well, I think that the first time that came up was in GURPS. They used to do that. Just want to interject.
Oh, I got you. Well, you could have interrupted me for that. So, but anyhow, the one thing that struck me when I first got into the rules and started reading about character creation was it made me think of when my son was a teenager and started getting into role-playing games, and he didn't read the books or anything like that. I mean, he just saw me and my friends doing it, which are you guys, and he thought it looked like a lot of fun. And he was really into watching James Bond and things like that. And so we were playing Traveler, and I had the agent rule book, and he wanted to roll up an agent. And, he had ideas about like his secret weapons and things, such as an agent. Well, I had to invent all that kind of stuff. And it really just made me think, because my son wasn't, really into role-playing games, so he didn't understand the Traveler universe or any of that kind of stuff. He was just like, okay, I want to role-play. This would be a great game if you had a very experienced game masters, for sure you have to have, because it requires a great deal of imagination to help fill out your character and say what you can and can't do. But I love the fact that you can just create anything you want. I mean, you can literally make any ability you want. And at first it seemed daunting, a little overwhelming. I got into it, and first of all, I wasn't able to join in the character creation session, so I'm doing this all on my own. Stephen had sent me, some summaries about what the world's like and some of those kind of things. But once I got into it, and I started looking at a few of the abilities and stuff. I mean, my character just started creating itself. And I mean, it's really neat. I mean, I know we'll get into it here in a little bit, but and I'll need his help to flesh it completely out. But I'm pretty excited about it now, actually.
Yeah, it's what does OVA stand for? Open Versatile Anime? Is that what it is? Yes. Yeah. So the anime part I threw completely out the window at the very beginning, because Steven outlined what the world was, and I wasn't thinking anime at all, the big eye stuff. I was just thinking a role-playing game. And because of the way that this game's put together, it seems like that first step, like Frank said at the beginning, is for the game master to define the world, broadly speaking, So that gives you the backdrop for how you're going to start your character creation. So if Steven had said, you're in a world full of monsters, well, I would have made a monster type character. Or you're in a world full of big-eyed aliens that are invading Earth, I would have made a big-eyed alien character. Given that backdrop, that sort of gives you your platform or your canvas for creating your character. And then from there, you can just go through the steps in the character creation. I think it's 0 through 5 or something like that. And the very first step, you sort of think about what your character is, the end product of your character. And then it's easy from there. You're just going through and picking out all of the attributes which are either an advantage or disadvantage to fill that character out and hit it. So I think this is one of the most versatile, easy game systems I've ever seen. Yeah, Steve O is right. You definitely need a good game master for it.
Yeah, so perhaps unsurprisingly, I'm going to disagree a bit because while I see Jimmy's approach, I think is the way you need to approach this game, which is, let me come up with a conceptualization. Let me figure out what the advantages and flaws that allow you to realize that conceptualization. And then don't worry about it because it is the next stage that where I felt the game starts to have real issues and gets complicated, which is you can come up with these bonuses and negative things that modify abilities. And that's when you start teasing out some of the minutia, the important minutia of the system. And it becomes a little less clear to me as you read through the rules. And that gave me that was very challenging for me to try to figure out how that stuff worked. So the way the rules read is it's, things that modify abilities, but the way every one of those modifications talks about is about attacks. So then you have to think about, well, how does combat work? And how does, this work? How does that work? And they're a little, and then you go back to the samples and you start reading how they do things and you realize, oh, there's these attacks you have to come up with. Okay. It looks like they've just made those attacks up out of their imagination, which is really cool, but understanding the implications of the things that you're choosing is not very clear within the rules. And this is where I start having some issues with the rules because I don't feel like I never felt like I truly understood the implications of my choices. I think I could do a really good job of realizing my vision for a character, which is awesome. But I never really, and I don't think I will until we run through it, understand this was a good choice, that was a poor choice.
I think that's true with just about any new game you get into, unfortunately. And maybe doubly so in this game. I agree with you. I mean, as I'm looking at my choices, I'm thinking about role-playing. I'm not thinking a whole lot about how's this going to play out once I get into it. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I've picked some unusual choices, I think, and how that happens. I think this game is so open-ended that I think it just feels like there's going to be it's not going to be a real rule-heavy combat game. I'm assuming. Steven, can you confirm or deny that?
By rule-heavy, do you mean like grid-based on D&D?
Yeah, like if you look at a game like Dungeons and Dragons, the combat system is very, very concise, and it's either yes or no for everything. If you play it correctly, there's a rule for everything. So, I mean, I get the feeling this game is designed to be a little more fluid and a little more the GM says yes or no, as opposed to a rule book.
I expect that it will be closer to John's homebrew as far as what we do in a given situation, because I think that we're all, old enough and advanced enough in our thinking to be able to handle, well, yeah, that sounds plausible, or, oh, well, okay, but I think you'd really have to do it this way. Does that seem fair? So I think it'll be more of that rather than the rigid, just unbreakable bits of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, like with a number of role-playing games that we've played, I think I found that once you've played once, you go, okay, I see a couple flaws in how I created my character, and I should have done it this way. So I think most are going to be like that, and I think this is definitely that way, that it's probably going to be a case of, oh, that was a really bad choice for my abilities, or that was a weakness that doesn't really play well, or whatever. And so I think this is going to be one of those things that we'll probably need to do, kind of like a game for a couple of sessions, and then further tweak things maybe, to really kind of balance things out the way that we'd feel comfortable with. And that, I think that's with most of them, you're getting to a point where you feel comfortable or not.
So I love attacks, and coming up with my own with this particular system. I loved it.
Tic Tacs?
Tic Tacs. Coming up with Tic Tacs so your breath doesn't stink. I made this really large, dim-witted character, which I'm short, so playing a really, really big guy is fun. And this guy, I had to come up. He's a physical guy, doesn't use weapons, or not really. I mean, melee weapons, but I came up with.
See, that was a really good transition to talking about the backgrounds of our character. Way to go, man!
Oh, I just addressing.
I was going to set it up and say, let's talk about our characters and how we made them and all that other stuff like that. And he goes right into doing. Okay, Jimmy, how'd you make your character?
No. This is specific to what we were just talking about, which is attacks and coming and figuring that part of it out. I really love the way this was put together. It just took a minute for Stephen to explain it to me, and then I was like, oh, I get it. So you use perks and flaws, which are two things that you attach onto your abilities, specifically your attack ability. And you can come up with special moves that then you can apply in different situations. For example, I came up with this two-handed strike. Like, anybody who's seen the original Star Trek, William Shatner used to use this two-handed thing where he'd clasp his hands together and beat the Gorn up. So I came up with that, and it's a stunning strike, and I call it the Shatner Slam. So he puts his hands together, slams it on the ground, and it has an area effect attack. And then I have a weakness where I go insanely crazy, like I'll attack anybody whose name is Brad. So I have another thing called the Brad Buster, and I use that.
And by the way, I have to interrupt you there because I named my character Vrad.
Uh-oh.
It's close.
So, just so John knows, another one of my weaknesses is I'm hearing impaired.
Oh, yeah, this is going to be awesome.
So this could be interesting. And then I have Big Love Bear Hug as another one, and I have just a basic Stunning Strike. And I just love the way these work because you attach them onto your action, and you can't use them all the time because they have an endurance cost, and you only have so much endurance. But you have these special attacks that you make up yourself, and I love that. It's really easy to do, really fun, and they have it all outlined for you in the perks and flaws section.
Well, I didn't have as easy a time as Jimmy on that. It didn't make any sense to me when I was going through it personally. So it was challenging for me to understand what the hell was going on. Like I don't even know. Do I roll anything to hit? No. What do I roll? Do I roll a D6, a D20, a D100? What is a high number good? Is a low number bad? I mean, none of that stuff is really explained in the rules until you get deep into it. Mm-hmm. And that I found unsettling.
Unsettling?
That's the word I'm trying to say. Unsettling for me. And so if you're the type of player that really wants to understand the mechanics of the game, you really do need to go through and read all the rules before you make a character. And that was tricky for me. Now I know Stephen and Jimmy are much happier about the notion of let me come up with a conceptualization, a background, and run with it. And if that's the type of character generation you like, then this will be a wonderful system for you because like Jimmy said, you could literally invent anything. It's just understanding why you invent something and working with your GM to make that make sense. So you do, if you're going to GM this, you need to get really comfortable with the rules. So if the character goes, oh, I want to make a thing where I punch and it goes off in a nuclear missile, you want to say, no, that's probably not within the realm of capability. Or I want to flick, my fingers and it causes an itch in the back of the head. Okay, well, let's think about that one a little bit further. What the implications of that? Understanding those bounds as a GM, I think is going to require you to understand the rules a little better. Another critique I'll give to this character generation process is I feel that the way they've laid out the book is probably wrong. I think they've reversed some things. There's a whole chart that has all the weaknesses and the flaws. I think that would have been nice to see before you read the weaknesses and the flaws. And also, there's all these sample characters that just give you an idea of the range of types of things you can do. And those come, that becomes before any of the character generation rules. And I actually found going through the book, by the time I got done reading some of those, I was more confused than illuminated. So I kind of felt like the rules for this stuff would have been nice, and then the samples. But those are nitpicks if you get down to it. It's not like you can't read the book in a different order, or read the whole thing and put it together.
Yeah, so I've had a copy of this game since its first edition back in like 2005, 2006. And one of the reviewers in 2006 on rpg.net, this reviewer mentioned about those characters in the first edition and how it was a little overwhelming and maybe not exactly necessary. And they seemed to kind of get a little stuck on just how much of the book that took up. And it does. You start getting into it, and then all of a sudden you've got all these different examples of different characters from different genres, and you're looking at them and you're trying to make sense of the numbers and the bits on the character sheet, but they don't make sense because you haven't been able to dive into that part yet if you're reading the book sequentially. And then there's like DX. DX stands for damage multiplier. And I've had this damn book in one form or another for 15 years, and I still see it as dexterity.
Well, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, it's not a huge tome. This is a pretty thin book. There are 12 sample characters in this book. And each sample character takes up 2 pages. So it's not like your typical book where, it just, here's your one sample character or 2. But I also think the reason they included so many sample characters is so if you just wanted to dive right into the game, you could. But it is quite a few, as we're saying, and it does take up a very large chunk of the book.
If you look at the characters, the sample characters, to give you an idea of how a fully fleshed out character should be, it's great. But it really should be after all of the creation bits. And between the sample characters and the NPCs, that's like 20-25% of the book itself. And so, like, I know for me, I mean, even having had this book and looked over it for years, there were still things that I couldn't kind of work out on my own until we all got together to talk about it. And I was like, oh yeah, well, wait a minute, I'll look at that. Wait, oh no.
There was at least 2 points during my character creation that Steve said something along the lines of, my interpretation of the rule is, because it's not real clear. So I think that, unfortunately, this is not a wildly popular game, and there hasn't had, millions of people like D&D pouring over and arguing about the minutia of this particular interpretation of this one line and page, whatever the heck it is. So there's going to be some of that. So I think that, to reiterate yet again, to re-emphasize yet again, that you need to be experienced at this, be prepared to say, we need to make a ruling, we need to move on with life.
Yeah, well, once again, I think it's a game that is designed to be very open-ended. I mean, I think they included so many samples, and I agree. I think it should have been an appendix at the end of it. For more sample characters, look at the end of the book. Or if you want to dive right into the game, look at the end of the book. But I think this thing is designed to be very open-ended, create any kind of game you like. You can have any ability you like. These are all just samples. I mean, even the abilities are samples in a way, but it's to give you an idea of what you can do. And I think it's designed to be a very creative system between the game master and the players. I haven't really delved into the combat of it, though, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how the combat goes. I hope it'll be as interesting as I hope, based on what everybody's doing. But I wanted to bring up that this is available on Drive-Thru RPG, and it's a $15 PDF download, and it's well worth $15. It's worth more than $15. The production value is incredible, and that's something else other reviewers said. But I will say, before we get in any further, the average rating for this is 4.5 out of 5 stars with 57 ratings. So people are getting it, and they're figuring it out, and they're playing with it, and they enjoy it. And the guy who created it, Clay Gardner, that I've mentioned, I think, on other podcasts, he is very good. He's got a forum, so if you have trouble, you can participate in the forum and get answers. So these problems that we have are frustrating, and I think I can see ways to make it better myself structurally. But, people aren't, it doesn't have 1.5 stars.
Okay, so with that in mind, we've kind of kicked this around a bit. Let's get into the character creation, which is sort of the point of what we're doing in this episode. As just like in Root, what we'll do in subsequent episodes is we'll have one session, which will turn into like 8, where we actually run the campaign, and then we'll get together and talk about our experience with it. So that's coming as later on episode. We're going to talk about character creation now. So, as we mentioned earlier, everyone got together except for Steve-O and made characters. Steve-O has done this subsequently on his own, and I'm sure he's probably a little less fleshed out. I think Jimmy mentioned, I agree, talking to Steven was critical to me understanding the final touches to how to bring it all together, particularly things like attacks and stuff like that. So, with no further ado, let's talk a little bit about our characters. Now, Jimmy's talked about his a little bit, but I want to talk about mine because this is all new for me and definitely put me in a zone that is well beyond my comfort zone. What I decided when I sat down was, and I hadn't read a single line of the rules other than a brief look at it a few years ago when Steve brought this up the first time with us. I decided that if Steve's running this campaign and it's Steve's campaign, I'm going to use Steve's way, which I don't do. I'm going to invent a backstory. I want to play this character. Then I'm going to pick up the rules and try to figure out how to make that character as best as I can using the rules. Unbeknownst to me that I probably could not, I don't think I've ever played a system that was more adept at doing that exact process. Ever, because there was literally no decision point during my character creation in my backstory that I wrote up. I don't know, was it 4 or 5 paragraphs of a backstory, and I sent this to Steve, and I have not shared it with anybody else because in true Steve fashion, I didn't want to share it with everybody until this podcast. But I wrote up this backstory, and I was able to realize, I think, every point within that backstory. Okay, so I don't want to read the whole thing because it would take more time than we really deserve so that everybody else get into it. But I was thinking of a couple characters from television shows that I like when I was thinking about this character. And this character is a woman, which I've never played a female character ever. So I thought I would try that. Again, to sort of what I'm trying to do here, stretch myself as Steve would. Samantha is her name. Sam is how she goes by. She also goes by the name Cobalt, and we'll get into why. And that's for her professional reasons. She was an orphan, and she was not so much adopted as just sort of taken out of the orphanage by a woman who became her mentor. And this woman had one specialty, and that specialty was finding things for people. And by finding, I don't necessarily mean, go hunting for it, but that's one of the things she did. She would be the person that you would come to and say, I need to get this. And she would make it happen. I need to get a battleship. She would go find a battleship and sell it for you. She had a lot of contacts, both high and low, both, expansive, both meek and meager, all the everywhere in between. And Sam's job was to basically act as a clerk to help with this. During that apprenticeship, if you will, Sam made a lot of connections. So really her major power is that she's connected. She's incredibly well connected. Now, if you remember, the numbers go from 1 to 5. During character creation, it says in the book, no character should have a 5 as the highest. So that's like superhuman. So really, when you make a character, it can only go from 1 to 4. Steve limited us from 1 to 3. So I made the connections to 3. So that means she's incredibly well connected. Secondly, her mentor left her, and so she has this raging desire, passion to find her mentor. Or the reason her mentor left her is her mentor left her to go hunt for her daughter, the mentor's daughter. And so she's either wants to find some evidence or clue about where her mentor went, or where the daughter may be located. So that's her major sort of back driving quest, if you will. She also left her this bag. All right. And this bag, I literally took this from the rules, and the rule, it's called, help me out here, Steve. I'm trying to remember what it's called.
I would have to move my book, and that would entail me moving, and people can't see it, but I'm wedged into a small space.
I just alt tabbed. So it's a dimensional pocket. All right. And so what this bag has, and it's also a 3. So it's a very powerful dimensional pocket. Think of it kind of like it doesn't
Stephen's
look like
closet.
Well, it actually looks like the carpet bag from Mary Poppins, or almost a bag of holding if you want to use a D&D type of analogy. She can reach in there and she could pull out things, and that's where she would store the things for the most part that people were looking for if they were, manageable size, reasonably human carryable. So she can get items out of there that may help in a given situation. She's also a bit of an inventor. And the last thing that she got is she got this ring that her mentor would use, and that ring allows her to teleport from point to point, and it's a very powerful thing as well. She does have a weakness for orphans and lost causes, which is why she has a strong affinity and friendship. I just threw this in there today, by the way, with Jimmy's character, because he's kind of a bit of an orphan. Not that many people. He's a Lenny, let's be honest, a little bit at some level, to use that literary reference. And she hates institutions that go against lost causes and orphans and things like that. And she seeks to destroy them whenever possible. She's a pacifist. And the reason she's a pacifist is because everybody's a potential client. So don't hurt anybody, because maybe you can use them to make money, because she's greedy. Because being an orphan and coming from no means, she's concerned about making sure that she has a cushy life. So that's her backstory. Okay. And I've left out some details, believe it or not, but that's more or less it. I think I've covered it well. Don't you think, Stephen? Did I miss anything important there?
I love hearing you talk about it. It makes me so fucking happy. I can't explain that enough.
And during the character creation, one of the things I had to grapple with was attacks, and she's a pacifist. So the attacks that she would do would, not be damaging. And that took me a bit to work out. So one of the things that I worked out was within the bag, she's got this little pouch, and in that pouch, she has basically an unlimited number of ice crystals that come from this Arctic shelf that's fallen in. And that basically paralyzes people. It freezes them on the spot when she hits them. That's the idea. All of her attacks are built upon the notion of getting away and keeping people from hurting her. That's more or less it. So that's her first major way of attacking. The other is that she's got I came up with a great title. Let me look it up. Spock's nerves. So the idea is that she can teleport where she needs to, and she knows all these pressure points on people's body, and she can hit it, and it basically incapacitates them whenever she does that. So she'll tend to do that again. So she
do you suddenly hear a musical score go dun when it happens?
No, that's the Shatner attack, I think.
Oh,
it's if we ever fight, then you'd hear the entire on fire music. Anyway, that's my character. I when I was thinking about this character, the two characters that I had in my head, just so you know, is there's a character from a show called White Collar, and I really like the show White Collar, and that character is Mozzie, and that character knows a lot of things, but is not, what you call a fighter. And the second character is from Warehouse 13. It's Claudia, who is sort of the technical person on the back end from Warehouse 13. So those two characters I had in my head as I was forming this. All right, who's next?
I approve.
Well, even
sorry. I didn't know that about the Warehouse 13 thing. I love Warehouse 13, so you've made me even more happy. I'm more happy.
Does anyone have any questions for me about the backstory or my character or anything like that?
Now, I want to find out during the game any other details or things you haven't shared with us. Leave it as a surprise.
Okay, so who wants to talk about their character next? How about Jimmy, since there's a connection there?
Okay, I'm going to talk about my character by actually going through the steps that are in the manual. So there are steps like 0 to 5, and I'm going to go through them really quick. So step 0 is a discussion with your game master. He sets out the world in which you're going to be playing and with your fellow players so that you make sure you're not creating basically the same characters. That way you can create different characters and fill out the party, make a more balanced party. We sort of did that. Steve-O wasn't with us, so it's going to be interesting to see what kind of character he ends up creating and see if there's any overlap there. So the second step, step 1, that was step 0, getting together and talking about it. Step 1 is the concept. So this is really a fun part for me. This is how I create characters in just about all the games that I do. I come up with the idea of the character, and I wanted like a naturally large guy, has a gigantic frame, something like, so I based it mainly off of this character in Batman called Grundy, and also a character in a movie called Blazing Saddles called Mongo. And I think I've decided to change my name
Mongo Pawn in Tree of Life.
Exactly, and that's how I want him to talk. I want him to be Mongo, and then his other name is Bark Bark, because that's basically something he says a lot. And I won't get into why, but Mongo Bark Bark. So most people know him as Bark Bark because that's something he says a lot while he's talking. So that was my concept, a really dim-witted, large guy, bad at hearing, can hear some, but, it's not terribly great. And then, he goes around smashing things. The last game we played, Root, it had this really neat game mechanic where you would assign the other players, you would assign some kind of relationship. So to make it easier on Steven, I went ahead and talked with Frank about this a little bit. I think I just came up with it, and I wanted one of my perks or one of my abilities or weaknesses was that I had to be a guardian of somebody. So I made my character a guardian of Frank's character. So that was pretty much the next step, step 2, which is your abilities and weaknesses. So I went through and chose my abilities, chose my weaknesses, basically to fill out that character. After that, I don't know if you guys can still hear the dogs.
The reason Bark Bark gets along with me is because I hired Bark Bark, and I just call him Mon for Mondo. Yeah, I just call him Mong, and I hired him, and I picked him up because he's one of my lost causes, and he does my heavy lifting, my literally heavy lifting, because I'm a small, slight girl, really, and I can't do that stuff. So he's my associate, part protector, part forklift.
Yep. The next step is step 4, health and endurance. Those are pretty simple. They're assigned to you, and then they're modified by your abilities and your weaknesses. And then you do your finishing touches, which is, I guess that's the things, probably picking your perks and your flaws and thinking about your appearance and style. So I'm still working on those a little bit, but for the most part, he's just this really huge guy, black bowl cut hair, dark brown eyes that sort of blend in with these people, so it almost looks like a big black. Yeah, Frank.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought there.
Yeah, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit about the rules. You have a certain number of points, and we talked about that before. There are alternative ways you can go about doing that. We chose the base 0, or rather Steven chose the base 0 way of building out the characters, and so that your abilities and your weaknesses would have to sum to 0. You also have something called a scaled cost.
Well, let's just say that there's lots of different ways you can look at the rules.
There's 3, really, essentially.
And you can invent your own if you wanted to. It's whatever makes, sense. If you play the game once, you may go, this makes a little more sense to do it a different way. I don't know. It's up to you.
Yeah, looking at it, I like the power ceiling way. I think Steven may have picked the other way just because it was the easiest one, or maybe the most versatile one, but I like the power ceiling option, which is, You can have 5 points that you could put towards your abilities and a total of 15 so that you could fill out another 10 with weaknesses if you wanted to, but you can only put 5 toward your abilities. I sort of like that one.
I wanted to make sure that everybody had overwhelming choice to force a little bit of, oh, okay, because you might have started to work on one ability and then fixed it with a weakness and then thought, well, maybe there's something complementary. How can I work that with perks and flaws? And, do I do another ability with another weakness?
Yeah, I will say that had we chosen that method, I would have had a very different character because I would have been a little more min-maxy thinking in my approach, and I wouldn't have necessarily tried to just realize my vision for a character. That's not a bad thing. That's not a critique. It's just, those decisions do have implications when you're going through this character generation. So, it's worth, as a GM, thinking that through a little bit. I also wanted to note those last thing that Jimmy mentioned in the process of, I forget what they're called, but they're basically not important. They're just little
perks and flaws.
Not the perks and flaws. That's part of your attributes. There's another one that, like your eyes and things like that. They don't matter.
They call it fluffing.
Yeah, they're fluffy. I mean, they don't really matter. They're just, things that are kind of interesting notes. For example, mine, every time I teleport, my hair color changes. So that it doesn't have any impact on the game, really. Maybe on the role-playing side, but not really in the mechanical side. But it's kind of neat way you can flavor out your character.
Yeah, you pick things like your sex, your height, your weight, your hair color, eye color, occupation, hobbies, favorite foods, allies, enemies, love interests, that kind of thing.
Okay, so let's move on to John, who he had a slightly different approach because, as he said earlier, he had a thought and a notion and kind of built around that. So I'm kind of curious how his thought process and hit it.
So, as I said, when I was going through, I hadn't really thought of any particular character. I didn't really know enough about the system to get a good idea of it. So I started reading a little bit of it, and I was also pretty tired when we were trying to do it. So I was about half there. So first I started looking at how they did abilities, and then I was like, oh, you got weaknesses, and then Steve clarified that we would have our abilities and weaknesses should total out. So that whatever number of abilities we have in terms of point cost should equal the weaknesses so that we, zero sum. I started looking at some of the abilities I wanted, and I got about halfway through, and I was like, okay, I've got a couple of them I'm interested in. I decided, well, let me look at the weaknesses and see what kind of things I'm going to have to deal with. So then I started doing that one and going by weaknesses and picked up a couple. And one that kind of hit me immediately was this ageism. And so I thought, pinpointed on that one immediately, and I thought, well, I'm going to do like an old character.
You're going to be Wesley Crusher, aren't you?
Pretty much. No.
Okay, now wait a minute. A quick aside. We love Will Wheaton.
Hate Wesley Crusher.
I'm down.
Love Will Wheaton.
So, in fact, that's the reason I actually despise Star Trek Next Generation.
Who?
Was almost entirely the cause of.
He was in
that
Highlander
character.
too.
Oh, that explains it.
Them's fighting words, man.
It's just a crap shame. But anyway, so I went in and so I ended up deciding to take the ageism, and then I also picked up like another thing with bizarre appearance. And so my character looks young, but also has like elvish ears, really pointy ears. And I guess in the kind of anime world, they're going to be probably fairly large as well. That's the way that seemed everything, especially with your head, is much larger than normal. But anyway, so I kind of went with this aspect, and I was like, okay, this will be interesting and stuff. He gets a lot of crap because he looks young, but he's not. But everyone thinks he's a child. Looks like he's about 12, maybe. Another thing that I picked was quirk. Yeah, he had a quirk, and something he's kind of obsessed with or whatever. That's kind of an odd. Now, it's not a huge deal, but it's something he's kind of quirky about. Just out of blue, I decided to pick teddy bear. Immediately, my mind went back to this whole thing of one of the abilities I saw that I was kind of interested in, and then Steve had talked about this, being able to kind of pull things from these interdimensional pockets and everything else. And so I thought, I'm going to have the ability to heal. But the way that I heal people is I have this teddy bear that I carry around, and I stuff my hand into its back, and I pull out its stuffing, and I can heal people's wounds by stuffing the teddy bear stuffing into the wound.
I cannot explain to you how much I love this.
Okay. I
So,
like it.
so it's just kind of this weird. And I'm a kid running around pulling stuffing out, and of course it just constantly fills back up. So
Kinda weird.
Supply of stuffing. But I can just pull this stuffing out of this teddy bear's ass and, smack into your wounds on your face and everything else. And
Let me die. Don't put it from its ass. Just let me go.
What
so,
color is it? The stuffing.
White, just
Oh,
regular,
okay.
regular stuffing. So
Well, that leads to the obvious question: what
Not
color is the
polyester
teddy bear?
stuffing. Oh, yeah, I haven't come up with all the other stuff yet.
Does the
But the fact that
stuffing
he's
does the
Go ahead.
stuffing come back?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like a kind of interdimensional pocket kind of thing.
I gotcha,
So
I
it just
gotcha.
constantly, regenerates nightly. I don't know exactly how we'll have to work that out. I don't know because I don't have it really high. I only have like a 1x heal for the ability, but I might change that to 2 or 3. I'm not really sure
That's
yet.
brilliant.
And I want to highlight yet again that one of the lovely things about the system is at no point does the system ever go, well, that doesn't make any sense. It just
Right.
goes, okay, well, how do we realize that? And
Right.
that's really cool.
Well, it is very neat and stuff. I mean, the funny thing is that, as I said, since I don't have much of a thing with the whole anime, I have a little bit I've watched here and there, but I don't know a lot about it. But I know that there's a lot of these little oddities that kind of go on. These, characters that look like they're 14 carrying around swords the size of a Chrysler, just all the weirdness and stuff.
Well,
of it.
it's
I kind of
anime, so Toyota, but still.
Right. True. Sorry, Toyota.
The
So
size
you
of
had
a
this whole
Chrysler.
thing, right? I thought, well, I'm gonna go ahead and let my mind go, whatever, just do kind of weird stuff. And so then so that's kind of that one aspect of him is this running around. He's also like absent-minded, not horribly so, just every once in a while. And he's also impulsive. He's not going to really have a lot of abilities versus weaknesses or anything else. But then his other thing is he has like art of invisibility and evasive and combat expert. That's the one that's actually the highest ability that I have, and it's only level 2. But I was going to kind of go with the possibility that when he does attacks and stuff, he throws things. Now he keeps like daggers on him, and maybe even has daggers also in the teddy bear. So you don't know what you're going to get. Is it going to be stuffing to heal you or a dagger to the face? So
Yeah, that
something
could
along
be-
those lines.
That actually could be kind of interesting if you incorporated, like, you pull in, anytime you reach into the teddy bear, maybe you don't know what you're going to, I need a weapon, and you reach into the interdimensional pocket, and, who knows what you're going to pull out,
Right.
to use as a weapon. That may be a,
Well, it can
fun
even go
twist.
along with my character's absent-mindedness, in that I reach in and I forget what I was looking for, and then I pull out stuffing when I meant to, pull out a dagger. I don't
Yeah.
know. I haven't thought of all that stuff yet. So
Well, that is one of the things that's written in that particular ability of the dimensional pocket, wherever. That's what's true of my bag as well. Is that when I reach in there, you roll, and what you get may or may not be useful
right.
based upon what you roll. So that's kind of built into sort of ability, but it's neat.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I thought might be kind of
Very
fun
cool.
to go ahead and be able to use, like I'll reach in, and instead of pulling out a throwing knife, I'll pull out a ashtray. That would still hurt somebody. You throw it in there and hit them in the face and stuff. So that's okay. So that's kind of as far as I got. I thought about doing the whole thing where he's not as young as he looks, but he's not very old, and I thought about also making him a no parents orphan. That's the word for it.
Right,
Yeah.
which is why he's part of my team, because I picked
So
him
that
up
would work. Yeah.
as
It actually
as,
makes it really kind of funny, the whole thing about, then also my name being Vrad, which is very close to Brad, which is annoying.
Yeah.
And it might be that actually I might name my character something else, but he only uses Vrad around him, around Bark just to antagonize him. That would actually be fitting. So, okay.
Yes. So you could, as soon as you all said that, I was like, what a great way to trick Jimmy's character into berserking at the right moment or when you need him to. It's, hey, Brad! and he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I just, that whole little thing, I'm so happy.
Oh, it's going to be fun. So
John is part of my logistics team. So that's his role within my team that I've had to assemble because all my resources went away. And so when my mentor went away, so I've had to slowly assemble these things, and they're from, cast-offs and orphans. I'm interested to see what Steve-O comes with. Jimbo, you were saying something?
Yeah, I didn't mention my weapon, my primary weapon. While I am just mainly hand-to-hand, I have a set of brass knuckles. Now, when I originally created the brass knuckles, I had 2 sets. I decided to go with 1 set. I'm going to call them kittens. That's the name of my brass knuckles. And every time I punch with them, the brass knuckles change their surface. So it might be spikes one time, and it might be little squeaky toys the next. So it's going to just cycle through different punches. Exactly. So it might be, ow, squeak, ow, squeak. So, and it just cycles through all kinds of different surfaces. It might be bark. It might be pudding. It could be anything. Maybe we'll create a random chart with Steven to see what kind of stuff comes out of the brass knuckles.
Your teddy bear's color changes if you teleport with me.
Oh, that could be
That'd
fun.
be neat. Yeah, I can see that. That would work pretty well.
So let's turn to.
Now,
go ahead,
wait.
Steven.
What you were saying about your hair color, I mean, there are all kinds of things that you all are doing that have other implications. Because if you're somewhere, let's say you're somewhere and you're trying to broker a deal, and you're meeting with people, and they see you at lunch and everything's fine. They see you at dinner and your hair's changed, and anyone there happens to know your ability, that could be problematic. Because they'd be like, now, wait a minute, what was she up to? Why did she do that?
What that means is you'll have to carry around some Miss Clairol with you. So.
Or within my bag, I have a set of wigs that I use, kind of like a spy, changing out wigs constantly. So let's figure out how Steve-O could fit into this motley crew of misfits that we put together, kind of ad hoc. I want to stress, we didn't talk with each other at all about any of this until just now. So this is, even when we were working together, making our characters, we weren't talking about how this all fits together. Jimmy's the first person that really say, let me make this connection. And then I've said, let's make it all connected.
Okay. I'm not sure how we're going to fit this guy in. So I did mine completely in a vacuum almost. So first of all, let's start with the name. I don't know a lot about anime. I've never really watched it or anything, but I suck with the Japanese theme. So my name is Yami Ga Noboru, and I challenge you guys to look that up. And my character is kind of this dark, arcane, dark wizard type character. And some of the skills that I picked were witchcraft. I have a companion that's a raven. I have the skill of illusion and incorporeal. And I also have minions, which I'll have to get with Steven about that I can call upon. I'm thinking something like black rats, something like that. So, those nasty European versions, not the brown ones we have over here. Arcane magic, knowledge, arcane. Not sure if I'm going to take spirit medium or not. I don't know. And then, but one skill I definitely want is barrier, which is to be able to cast a barrier of some type in order to, and I believe this is going to require a focus. So we may be able to incorporate that into some type of device, medallion, or something that I could possibly lose or must keep with me at all times. The weaknesses that I chose is ageism. I'm old, I'm arrogant, and I have a bizarre appearance. I'm very tall, very slender, very long, unkempt hair, a loner, and I have an obsession, which is to uncover arcane knowledge of the past, the secrets of the past, or witchcraft, secret things. Rude, I'm clumsy, I'm not very good at physical things, and this is not in the book, but I thought I would get with Steve on this. I thought nearsighted without my glasses, so that could definitely play into it in a way. So my character is obsessed with reading all types of ancient knowledge or secret hidden knowledge, and around arcane witchcraft type things. And I may or may not be dead.
Okay, so I one of the things that is part of my character is that she has like 3 level 1 knowledge, and that comes from having to basically learn something to comparable, somewhat competent level about a whole lot of different broad areas, because she's constantly having to trade them and buy and sell them and all that sort of stuff. But the one area that she doesn't know anything about is this magic, witchcraftian, arcane, other world, because not a lot of people know about it. So Steve-O character is my contact. He's the guy that I, like the Pawn Stars, call in to give the extra knowledge when I need some background on that. That's the link.
All right. So we will say, Steve, because of your name, that you are one of the people who are traveling west to east in North America, because at this particular time, the tone has kind of undulated and gone through peaks and valleys of intensity. And so right now, the intensity is fairly low. And that means that at the biggest peak, and especially in the beginning, there was a mass exodus across North America to the west. And then, as it went down the first time, people started coming back. And as well as people coming back into the area because they were wanting to figure out what the hell went wrong. So a lot of people came from the East Coast inland on kind of their own little search, either to get back to normal, maybe loot forgotten areas, try and find out information. That can make perfect sense as to why you ended up in this area and fell in with Frank and the crew. But what you're thinking of as arcane knowledge would be a little bit different in this world, because it's really based on our world. So when you're talking secret knowledge, forgotten knowledge, my main thought was, in this particular world, the things that we would look back upon and think about as magic, people experimenting in alchemy, Newton, for God's sakes. So some people over time had it right. Some people were plugged in a way that made their connection actually valid and not just the stuff of stories. And whether that is people who were into, actually like spells and diagrams and things like that. Was it, some guy who, was obsessed with the Golden Dawn at one time, or whatever, or Lovecraft. Lovecraft would have been one of those people who had some of that insight. He was closer to that, thin skin of the worlds than anybody gave him credit for. And so I really love the idea of the character. I'm just going to tweak a few little things so it kind of fits within the world, if that's okay.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, because when I was thinking about this character, I wasn't quite sure how it was going to play out. So, there's also psychic things and stuff like that. So I wasn't sure how much magic or you wanted to have in your game anyway. So, yeah, by all means. But regardless of that, I'm still who I am, my bizarreness. So,
absolutely. And it all fits. Like the barrier. Yeah. I mean, the barrier would be essentially you pulling the skin between the worlds across and between you and something else. Mm-hmm. And it would mean that only certain things would be able to pass that. And they do it with difficulty because you're essentially intertwining the two and creating a curtain. And that barrier that you manipulate is made up of both worlds. So anyway, not that I've been thinking about it while you've been talking and excited or anything, but I was.
Well, cool.
So I think it's fair to say, because we wanted this for, let's start to wrap this up a bit. It is one of, I think this is an incredibly, I don't want to use, I don't think we've ever done character generation like this before. I don't think we've ever come up with this degree of breadth and depth in any of our D&D party creations, or even Root, or any of these, or Traveler, or anything like that. Do you guys agree with that statement?
I think the way the rules system is designed, because of all of and I'm sure we all started there when we started looking at character creation. I think when we looked at the rule book and it had so many examples of characters, the very first thing you read about all those characters is all this massive background. So I think it just sets the tone for it that, hey, I'm going to, and for me, I had no idea what I was going to do. But then when I started, looking at some of the different abilities and stuff, I'm like, okay, I love horror. I love short fiction. I've been reading a lot of short fiction, lately, horror and things like that. And I love those kind of characters that, that Lovecraft or Ramsey Campbell or some of the others have come up with, where you have, there's that secret hidden knowledge, the arcane knowledge, and, you delve into it at your own risk kind of thing. So, and that's my obsession, my character's obsession.
Yeah.
So you say, what, why? I mean, that's to me, at least, that suggests that, no, you don't agree with my statement completely. You think there are other examples where we've been able to do something like this?
I think I maybe for all of us, as a group, but for me personally, it's sort of how I approach it anyway. It probably makes it easier than other systems to sort of apply the rules to create the character that I really want, but I sort of create the character up front and then just fill it in with whatever the rules require of me.
So would you find that characters that you're creating, and this is really a question for Steven too, because I think the two of you share a similar process, come up with a concept and then try to make the rules fit. Do you think that the rules are constraining to the point, particularly something like D&D, that it limits you artificially too much?
Yeah, go ahead, Steven. You take this one.
Oh, okay. So with Dungeons and Dragons, you are limited to a cliche. It's become a cliche of itself, and you know what to expect from someone when they say, "I'm playing a paladin," and you have something in your mind, and if the person plays against that, it causes you difficulty sometimes if you're really invested in the cliche of the way that it's been set up and played. So as we were talking about the characters, I was really comparing it in my head to what I like about, and I don't do this very often, Traveler.
Drink.
So there you go. I thought I would be the one this time, because Traveler, even though I've only gotten to make really 4 characters, I was able to create in my head a very rich background and a personality for my character because Traveler allowed that. And the way that you make the characters in Traveler, it forces you to modify what you've thought of, and you've got to think about it in a different way. So I think I put Traveler and OVA kind of on the same shelf, but on different sides of the shelf.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think Dungeons and Dragons, but not to knock it, but it is what it is. You're absolutely right. You create a character class and you have certain abilities, and unless you multi-class, you can't do very much outside of that. You can't cross-train or anything. Whereas a game like Traveler and Call of Cthulhu, some of these games, for instance, one thing that Call of Cthulhu allows, I mean, it has tons of occupations and you start with a certain amount of skills. Now, it also leaves it open for if you have something else in mind. If you want to be a different occupation that doesn't appear in here, get with your game master. You guys come up with these skills together. There's actually a section in the book about creating character classes and the type of skills, because you don't want to overbalance the game, have too many skills. But another nice thing about Call of Cthulhu is when you're finished, you're not restricted to, well, okay, I'm a private investigator. That means I can't have archaeology skill. That's not true, because you can have hobbies, you can pick things, and you get to pick 4 skills totally unrelated, as long as they kind of fit your character. So, I like that as well. I like it. It allows you to mold your character to be a little more of a person. But again, we're creating people that have a history, where D&D you're not. Where in Traveler, you're creating someone that has a history. You sort of build your character as you're creating those characters.
Yeah, to Steven's point, I think I would use the analogy of two sides of a same coin, as opposed to a bookshelf, where OVA says, come up with an idea and we'll try to make it work. Traveler says, we're going to make you go through a process. Now we need you to make something out of this. And it's a different way to approach it, but both of them do allow for arguably a richer character that you can role play than other gaming systems. D&D,
now,
we're calling out a little bit, but there are others like that too.
But one very important factor in Traveler different from this game,
you can die.
That's true. You can die in character creation. However, what I was getting at is it's still based very much on a die roll. You get to pick what chart you want to go on, like what skill table you want to try and use or benefits table you want to use, but you still have to roll a die. You may not get that skill that you wanted. Whereas this game and also Call of Cthulhu and some other games, you get to pick every single skill you want, as long as you balance it with some type of some type of weakness, right?
Yeah, assuming you use, depending on the character generation system, if you, in Jimmy's case, the one he would have gravitated towards, a little less capability to do that. But yeah, it depends. The system allows for that at some level.
Which actually, if you think about it, is also what John's system allows.
That's right. Very good.
Okay, so another thing I wanted to point out in this, we've been talking about OVA, which stands for something anime,
open versatile anime,
whatever. And I know John and Steve-O referenced in their discussion of their characters that I don't know anything about anime, but here's what I was thinking. I think Jimmy may have made some mention of anime when he was talking about his. I can't remember. I didn't, but I could have very easily said I don't know anything about anime because I don't. It's not my thing, but here's what I did. And without a doubt, the art in the book crouches everything and those sort of norms of anime. There's nothing in there that would make you think not anime. However, having said that, this is so steeped in anime on the surface. In reality, it isn't. It doesn't. You don't need to have that connection. You don't need to think in those terms. You don't need to go, well, I don't like anime, so it's not going to be the system for me. I would really caution listeners to look at this in terms that you're comfortable with, because the rules, I think, are flexible enough that you could do D&D using this rule set at some level. You could do a fantasy setting if you wanted to. You could recreate Traveler at some level with this rule set. Or Call of Cthulhu. The rules are very flexible, versatile, to use the V in the OVA. And don't get hung up on the A. Get hung up on the V. Because I got hung up on the A, and I was like, I don't do this. I just don't want to do this. I don't like anime. I just don't like it. There's things that people don't like. There's lots of people in the world that love raisins. I don't like raisins. I mean, that's just, people have preferences. So I got hung.
Raisins are the devil.
Yeah, but I got hung up on the anime part. Don't do that, please.
But if you like anime, I would like to point out it is a gorgeous book. I mean, the artwork is very, very nice. But like Frank said, I mean, I got to the skills and stuff. I wasn't thinking anime at all. I just thought about role playing games like we always do and what we could do with this rule system. But if you like anime, you may want to buy the book just to peruse through it. It's a gorgeous looking artwork in it for sure.
Yeah, it's very professionally done. It's a gorgeous little book.
I have to say really quick and stuff. When I first looked at the book, one of the first ones that I went to was a character, like, as somebody was saying, they have a number of characters already, pre-generated characters in there for you to kind of look at and get an idea off of. And so this first character that I looked at is named Fukiko. And I was like, well, this just kind of validates everything I've thought about this right off the bat. Because, it's the little anime, little skipping girl with pink everything and slightly disheveled. But I was looking at her, that has her attacks and combat stats. And so, like, the first one is Neko Neko Catnip Cantrip. In her magical girl form, Fukiko can perform a variety of mystical attacks of love. And then the second one is Neko Neko Heart Burst. Fukiko forms her hands into the shape of a heart over her chest and emits a barrage of magical heart-shaped bursts.
This.
And I'm like,
we love you.
what the? Yeah, I don't know. I have no. I don't have the. I don't have the skill set to go. Oh yeah, I know what to do with this. I'll be like, so does it do damage? Does does that heal? Is it? I mean, of course, I'm going back
Could
to
be charm person.
Well, you don't know. It doesn't say.
There's no conceptualization. That is one of the bad things about the example.
Magical heart-shaped burst. What does that mean?
It's Nirvana's hidden album.
I mean, it basically just sounds like,
What do you want it to mean, John? What do you
want what I want it to mean is I want it to mean something. In its current form, it means nothing.
You need to watch more anime.
There's no context behind that. And so that, for me, when I first saw that, I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't have any reference for how to deal with this. Because, I mean, from the artwork, and what I know of this stuff, it's all, just super cute stuff, leg kicked in the air at odd, impossible poses, kind of, goofy stuff that you see little kids watching. And I'm like, this isn't a role-playing game. This is like a primer on how to draw, anime characters.
So the first character that I ran into was Braun, okay, which looks like a nerd. And you go to his attacks and combat stats, and he has exactly one. First day off sale, shove. Affinity, nerdy. When a new Draconic Quest game is out, Braun can hold his place in line sometimes. That's literally his entire attack. That's all of it. And I read that, and I thought, this is stupid. What am I supposed to do with this? I don't have any idea. But to sort of piggyback on what John is saying is that when you start looking at those abilities and weaknesses, don't be afraid to let your mind wander a little bit. And like he did, he went to a teddy bear. I don't know why, but he did. And he came up with a really interesting, set of abilities. It's kind of nifty.
I kind of went for, I thought, okay, I want to try to embrace this and completely play against my type. I'm going to go and have some goofy fun with it and try and enjoy it. Even though I came across Fukiko, I was like, I'm just gonna push through. I'm gonna pull through this to do something. And it was one of those things that was really kind of fun to create something. And it is very nice that the system is set up so like the one things that I have an issue with, and I hate to bring it up. I know other people do and stuff, but I try not to bring it up in the podcast and stuff. Is my game system that I've created, or mostly created. The biggest thing that I have with mine is mine will handle like an Old West game, or you can do a Call of Cthulhu mostly with it. You can do fantasy, you can do sci-fi. But then when you get to the like superhero game system, like DC's, or Marvel's or any of these others, or you're trying to like have superheroes kind of deal, that's where everything kind of breaks down, because you end up getting into powers that are so vast where you have to kind of,
The issue is that things like combat doesn't scale necessarily well, because it makes an assumption of a bit of realism, and inherently superhero stuff is by definition not real.
Not realism, yeah. I mean, I had some stuff in mind that kind of handles some of that. So that actually the combat numerically can handle some of that, but it's then kind of taking place of what attributes, etc., kind of come into things. So like like the attributes in mine, you can, the highest for a human is plus 25, the lowest is a negative 25, and that's a direct percentile bonus. For something like Superman, that number would be something like 10,000.
After he touches kryptonite.
Right, yeah. And so the thing is that's where it gets it kind of, things just kind of get broken. There's kind of no, there's almost no limit on some things. And so this one has so many things you put in, and where you're, especially the way Steve has kind of, had us create our characters, where our weaknesses have to kind of match our abilities. Then you kind of already have that built in, bringing things down a little bit closer to reality. But it's one of those things that's really kind of neat. Now, the only offside to this is I can see where it might be. I mean, it may not be difficult. I don't know. I haven't looked at the rules enough to know, but I'm just wondering how easy it would be to kind of create a character that's, a simple scientist who doesn't do anything kind of, and I'm sure that's in there, but it's not made for that. It is made for the kind of larger than life. And of course, that's what you want when you're role playing in general.
Okay. So, we've gone a bit. Let's see. Does anyone have any, last thoughts on the character creation of OVA or any part of it?
I'm
good.
glad that character creation turned out the way that it did, and that we actually had fun with it. I am hoping that my understanding of the combat and the rolling system and all that is firm enough when we start playing that I don't mess anything up. But I will say, just like I said earlier in the podcast, there were moments where we were discussing things about character creation where I was like, oh, no, wait, that's what that really means. Because it took discussing it with other people who were also having trouble thinking about a concept for me to get it, because this is very different. And so, we may hit those moments while we play. So I expect you guys to help me with that if we have a moment where it's like, now, wait a minute, Steve, does it really work that way? So that's all I'll say, prefacing to the gameplay to come.
Well, I know we'll figure it out, but it just brought to mind that a guy I knew years and years ago that would make a statement under these kind of conditions, and he would say, piss on it and we'll make it work.
And there's your redneck missive for the day.
I really kind of like that. That's how we'll make it work. I like that. Yeah.
All right. So we'll report back to you after we had a chance to play to see how this all goes. I think this was a lot of fun making characters, and we'll see how the playing of the system goes. And I'm optimistic this will be a lot of fun. So if you have any thoughts or questions about OVA, or just want to tell us things that we may have gotten incorrect or point us in towards resources we don't know about, you can hit us up in the contact information come along in a minute. I also should have started this, but I wanted to remind everybody to like, subscribe, bell, rate, up thumb, whatever it is you do on whatever platform it is that you use to listen to our podcast. It helps us out. It allows us to, get into search engines and things like that. If you would do that, it would help us out a lot. Talk to you next week.
Up thumb is my new favorite phrase.
Up thumb. That sounds like one of our abilities we could use with this character. But as a weakness, do I have to take down thumb? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's all we have for this week. Thanks for spending time with us. Please leave a review and comments wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have topic suggestions or would like to get in touch, you can reach us at roleplaygeeks@roleplaygeeks.com. Head on over to the website for an archive of all our previous shows, as well as links to all our social media channels. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next week.